Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TradeStation Masterclass. Today is a Platform Essentials series or session where we highlight functionality on the TradeStation platform and we try to dive deeper into its technology and how you can, maximize the use or the potential of such technology. So today we're going to talk about types of chart studies and how they affect chart scalings, or it's a little combination of both, studies and scaling, things that we should be aware of, and things that you probably didn't know existed. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into today's topic, let's go through some of the disclosures. Keep in mind that every symbol and idea that we talk about is for educational purposes only. It is not a recommendation of TradeStation. Also, that active trading is not suitable for everyone, and that past historical performance is no guarantee of future results. For additional information or for more details, go to the link right there on this PowerPoint slide, www.tradestation.com/important information. Okay, let me switch over to my TradeStation platform and let's talk about scaling first. And then we'll jump over to studies and the type of studies that there are. The scale right here on the right-hand side of the TradeStation chart, and we are referring to scaling inside of a chart analysis. So the scale on the right-hand side is pretty much automatically determined. How is it determined? By looking at the highest high and the lowest low of the chart that you have in view. The highest value, the lowest value determines the scale on the right-hand side. And that's the reason why the highest high and the lowest low are always touching the edges of the screen. You're going to see that on this particular view of this chart analysis, my scale, you can see the lowest value here is around 3870. Now the highest value is about 3920. This is on a 5-minute chart of at ES. But you're also going to notice that as I increase the bar spacing on this chart, the scale will automatically update. Let me show you. Let me increase the bar spacing. Nothing is happening yet here on the scale. You see the bars spacing out. Why is nothing happening here? Because I still see the lowest low and the highest high within this view. But notice what happens when this lowest low drops off the screen. Everybody sees a 3870. I'm going to continue increasing. Now, okay, one more. There we go. So now that low is off the screen, we have a new low, and you can see the scale here automatically adjusted to that new low. I'm going to continue to increase. Now we're going to get this low off the screen by increasing the bar spacing a little bit more. And now you can see that the scale here automatically adjusts, and it's always going to adjust to show you the highest high and the lowest low in the chart. Pretty cool, huh? That way you can see the full chart in view. A lot of people don't like that. Some people don't like the fact that, the highest high here is almost touching the edge of the screen, or like the lowest low here is touching the bottom of the chart. Some people think that it gives them the impression that some data has been cut off. You can change that if you want. You can give your chart a little bit of space around the candles so that you have something, we call it here margins. And I mean, a lot of applications, these are margins. Margins around the chart. Where are they? Well, you go to data and click on edit symbol. Or the way that I like to do it, I always like to double click on any of these candles, and it takes you to the same dialog, customize symbol. I'm going to go to the scaling tab here. And in the scaling tab, I'm going to check a box here that says subgraph margins. When you turn this feature on, you have a 5% at the top and a 5% at the bottom. So it's going to be 5% of whatever value you have here on the screen. So this is almost at 4,000, right? So 5% of 4,000, I believe it's going to be, what, 20? 20 points? Is that what it is? I think it is, Or maybe it is more than that. Maybe it's 200 points. Maybe it is 200, not 20. Let's go ahead and see. 5% above, 5% below. I'm going to click OK. And there we go. So you can see that it gives you a little bit of space right here at the top and a little bit of space here at the bottom. If you like this view, especially if you're doing a lot of drawing tools or if you have things happening above or below the candles, giving yourself a little bit of margins may be useful. Again, where do I find that? I double click on one of the candles, go to my scaling tab, and there's a checkbox that says subgraph margins, and you can adjust the percentage if you want more or less margin. Is that okay? You also see the range, which is set to automatic. This is the behavior that we just described, that depending on how expanded your chart view is, your scale here on the right-hand side will adjust to the highest high and the lowest low automatically. That's what we call an automatic scale range based on date range on screen. What this means is that it's only using what is visible, the date range on the screen. So right now, my chart is showing, um, candlesticks from about 11 a.m. all the way until right now, which is 12:30, and is automatically adjusting to that view. Now on this drop down, you have a couple more options. You have entire date range or percent above or below last. Entire date range is interesting because entire date range will look at everything you have on the chart. Now, on this 5-minute chart, you may not be aware how much historical data you have, but if I go to the settings tab, I can see that this data goes back 5 days. So it's going to really use all the historical data on the chart and find out what was the highest high and the lowest low of that 5-day period. And that's what's going to set your scale here on the right-hand side. Let me show you. Let's go here to drop down entire date range, and I'm going to click OK. So take a look at the chart. It doesn't change the spacing between candles, but it does seem like the chart is squeezed all the way at the very top because historically we see some data points that are somewhere over here. So we can see the range of prices since 5 days ago. It goes from 37.40 all the way to 39.40. So it's almost 200 points movement since 2 days ago. Now, if I squeeze the chart, if I reduce the bar spacing, and I'm doing that pressing the down arrow key, you're going to see how the scale here on the right-hand side doesn't change because it's automatically using all the data. So if I squeeze the chart all the way that it can go, we still don't have, or we do because now we have some black areas. So these are the 5 historical days that we had in the historical or in the data view. So now you can see that it goes all the way to the bottom and all the way to the top. So that's one way that you can look at a chart and see or have a feeling of how far up or how far down the data is at the moment compared to 5 days ago, if that is the time frame that you've loaded on the chart. Let me double click on here again. And the third option is percent below and above last. When you select that, you have some boxes available to you to specify, okay, what's the percentage above and below the last traded price? So what you're going to see here, let me click OK, is that the time frame or the chart here will go to the last traded price and add 5% to the top and 5% to the bottom. Interesting. Let me go and double click on my scale here. And first of all, set it to date range on screen. And then I'm going to come back here and set it to percent above and below last. So it squeezes the chart a little bit. Let's see. I want to know. Yeah, 200 points, 5% of 4,000 is 200 points above and 200 points below. So this is literally doing what we had expected on the one before. Now let me go back here because it's kind of interesting that if I do date range on screen, this subgraph margin, lower 5%, upper 5%, may not be, is it 5% of the scale that is here? That's probably what it is. So when we look at the values here, because when we were talking about subgraph margins, we said, okay, this is 5% of the value of what you're seeing on the chart. But no, it says that should be 5% of the range that is visible on the screen at the moment. So if you have, from 38.70 all the way to 38 or 39.20, we're talking about 150 points is 5% of that, of what the current scale is. That's what the subgraph margins calculates on. But here, if you select percent above or below last, let's reduce this to 1%. 1% is going to be about 40 points, and you can see those 40 points above and below the last traded price. The nice thing about doing, percentage above and below the last traded price is that the last traded price is going to be centered on the screen all the time, and the scale will just adjust accordingly. Many times we want to do that, especially if you have targets and stops that are associated with the symbol and you want to see them on the screen, although this should not affect it because those orders are automatically displayed on the screen. So it's just a preference, and it's there for you to play around with and see what is the scale that best suit your chart. The default, again, let's go back there into format symbol, and let's go ahead and set it to the date range on the screen. I'm going to uncheck the subgraph margins, just wanted to show you where they were. Oh, by the way, let me go back in there because I wanted to show you this other checkbox that says expand range to include account open order. So this is what we were just talking about. If you have a profit target and stops as part of the symbol that you're trading, those will automatically show up and they will squeeze the chart scale accordingly. Let me go ahead and show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go to ESU 22, which it's the same data. It's just it's a tradable symbol. So if I go here to my trade bar and I buy one contract at market, let me enable account orders and positions because I have mine turned off by default. So let me turn that on. You see the open order right there at 38.87. If I were to submit my target to 4,200, let me show you. Let me go here to trade, and I'm going to say I'm going to sell with a limit at 4,200. Now 4,200, of course, is not visible here, but if I send an order, it's going to automatically adjust. There we go. You see how it squeezes the chart down, and I see my profit target at 4,200. If I click on that line, let me turn on chart trading. Because if I bring this line down, let's say to 4,000, let me bring it down by clicking and dragging. If I bring it down there, you can see how the scale automatically adjusts. My order is still at the top, but the scale changed. And now my order is not at 4,200, it's at 4,000. I mean, I can continue to bring it down and put it right here at 3,900. And you can see that the chart will automatically adjust to that level. So those are things that happen automatically. And if you don't modify the scaling, it'll be automatic for you. So again, double clicking on the candle, that's the checkbox, expand range to include account open orders. It does that automatically for you. Or expand range to include studies. That's something that's turned on as well. So if I were to notice how my chart is touching here at the top and it's touching right here at the bottom. But if I were to use a study that kind of plots lines around or at the top or below those points, the chart will automatically adjust. If I go to studies and add study, let me add something like the Bollinger Band. See, you can see how the candles are automatically shifted to allow for that blue line to show there at the very top and the red line to show, the lowest points of that band. So yes, it automatically adjusts the scaling for you to see those lines on the chart. What is that controlled by? Again, double click on the candle. Is that checkbox that is automatically turned on, expand range to include studies. You have a checkbox here that says center last price. Let me go ahead and remove all these orders and disable chart trading. If you choose to center the last traded price, so here, center last price, it's going to put your last traded price at the center of the chart. And then everything else is adjusted accordingly. But if I squeeze the chart, the center won't change. It'll keep that last traded price at the center of the screen. Now, some users may want to do that if they want. Let me double click here. That's that checkbox, center last price. Anytime you make adjustments here to the scale, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you can click and drag the scale to change the range of it. It switches the scale to fixed. See, right now my scale is automatic. So if the price all of a sudden shoots to 4,000 or 4,200, the scale here automatically adjusts and you'll see that data. But if you come over here to the scale and you squeeze it a little bit, notice that you are technically adjusting the scale yourself. Maybe I can raise it. You can see that some candles are outside of the range. And if I go back to the format symbol, I'm switched from an automatic scale to a fixed one that goes from 3866 to 3909. Very specific fixed numbers. If anything happens outside of these numbers, I won't see it. And that happens anytime you click and drag on the scale, it sets it to fixed because you're manually adjusting that scale. To set it to automatic, you can come down here and put it or click on reset. It resets to automatic, or you can, double click on one of the candles and set it to automatic. I've heard that sometimes you don't get those overlay buttons at the bottom. And if that's the case, just keep in the back of your mind that you can go to customize symbol, come in here and set the range to automatic. It should do the trick for you. Another way that you can adjust the scale here is by selecting a movement size in relation to size. So here 1 inch equals 5 points. If I look over here on the right-hand side, I can say that that's approximately what I see here. Maybe a little bit less because every, I would say 3/4 of an inch, I have 5 points of the S&P E-mini. Now, of course, if you change that, if you say, I want 1 inch to be 20 points, then that will change this drastically because the visual aspect of 1 inch will represent 20 points instead. So what I expect to happen here on my scale is for it to be squeezed significantly. Let's go ahead and click OK. And here we go. Now I can see a visual kind of 1 inch from one value to the next, and you see the difference is 20 points. So it's a visual allocation of prices based on size, and it does try to stick to that size the best it can. So from one value to the next is about whatever it's displayed here. Let me go back to format symbol. I had it to 1 inch, but you can set it to centimeters if that is what they use wherever you're at. In the United States, we use inches, but I know in many different countries you have centimeters, but you can set that based on a measured scale. So you can choose how you want to set it. So if I leave it on automatic again and click OK, then it sets it to automatic. I may want to keep it on automatic and still provide my scale a little bit more detail. For example, if I open up my chart more, let me disable some of the things that I did here. So let me go back to format symbol. Let's see. Format, there we go. And I don't want to center the last price. Okay, so I want you guys to look at the scale here. I set it to automatic. The last price is not centered. I still see a big jump from one price to the next. For example, I see it from 3,900 to 3,910. Maybe I want to give my scale a little bit more detail. You can do that without squeezing it or moving it or making it a fixed scale. You can go into the format symbol one more time, and there is a checkbox down here that says custom axis increment. Take a look, it's set to 0.5. I can set it to 5 points. If I'm looking at the scale here, it goes from 3890 to 3900. There's 10 points. So if I set it to 5 points, I'm going to add a price in between. I'm going to click OK. And it adds that more detail here because you're customizing the scale. If you want to take that even further and do 2.5 points, let's go back in there, format symbol, and say 2.5 and click OK. And you can see the additional detail right here on the scale. So if you're missing prices in between that you'd like to see, then you can customize the scale to show that increment. Of course, it gets to a point that it cannot add more. For example, if I were to change it to 1, I don't think it'll be able to squeeze 1 price increments on the scale. See, if you set it to 1, the most that it can do is squeeze 2 points at a time. So it'll do the best it can until it can do better. You specified 1 point. So if I increase the bar spacing a little bit more, now you can see that I have 1 point in between. So it's not until it has enough space to show you the detail that you've specified that is able to do so, like right now. So you can set it to 1 point, but if there's a ton of data on the chart and it's set to automatic, it'll do its best to give you the detail you need here on the right hand side. But at any point, if you see that your scale is missing price points and you want to see them, just go to format symbol, do a custom axis increment and you can set it to 1, and it'll give you the most detail for every, as much as it can. All right. So custom on decimal places, we usually don't do that for symbols because symbols are traded in or are displayed with the number of symbol or decimal places that it trades at. So I don't think there is a particular reason why you would want to see more decimal places. For example, you know that the S&P E-mini, this futures trades in quarters of a point. So it's never going to have that third, additional decimal place. So there's no point of adding it. Some other symbols like SPY may have some price appreciation right here on the last traded price. Let's see if that's the case. I'm going to double click on one of the candles and I'm going to say custom decimal places and I'm going to set it to 3. So you can see that the price here is shown with a third decimal place. Now, we're going to watch this for a few seconds to see if you see that third decimal place show anything, because sometimes that's just the way that the data comes through the exchange. We just see the minimum price increment, which is a penny. So you don't see that that's the third decimal place, which could be, price improvement. If I were to open up, the time and sales window, I think this is a different story because sometimes you're going to see some additional decimal places. On a regular chart, you don't see those reflected. So if it trades, for example, at 387.18 0.87, those 2 additional decimal places are not reflected here on the chart. And that's just the way that we get the data from the exchange. So if you really wanted to see, that third or fourth decimal place, if trades are happening with that price improvement, then I would recommend you pull up the time and sales, which shows you that detail. Okay. All right. So what else? Let me go back to the S&P E-mini. We were talking about scaling. So I pretty much used or explained everything here. You can divide the price axis if you want. If you divide it by 1,000, that is here, instead of showing 3,000 or 4,000, you'll see this right here. It expresses the number as a 3.89K. Kind of strange, but you can, it's just a display setting. I'm going to uncheck it. And you have the comma separators. Yeah, sometimes if the value is big, it's separated by commas. It gives you a more readable print than just seeing all the numbers together. I find that very useful, especially when you have volume. So if I go here to studies and I add volume, doesn't matter which one I use. And I maybe pull this into a daily time frame, you can see that it's easier to see the millions and the 100,000s separated by commas, it just gives you an easier to read number. All right. All right. What else? Let me go ahead and switch this to SPY. All right, perfect. So we have Spider on the screen. Let's talk a little bit about technical studies and scale, because the scale on the studies are actually also automatically adjusted. So if I increase the bar spacing here, you can see that my volume study is going up to 9 million. But if I squeeze the chart, I include other spikes here that go up higher, and I can see my scale adjusting here up to 18 million. So it does that automatic scale for you as well. And we have separate dialogues. We know that here for the symbol, you double clicked on the candle and you had a scaling tab. But on the study, you have the exact same thing. You double click on one of the bars here and you have a scaling tab that has some of the same functionality that you find on the symbol. Like if you want to set to an automatic scale, fixed scale, if you want to set it on movement size, also the decimal places. So same functionality, but specific to the actual study. Now, one thing that I haven't explained, and I know that some of you already know, is the scale type, because we've always been looking at linear scale, not semi-log. We need to understand what the difference is between the two, because this is a scaling presentation. By default, everything is linear, and the distance from one value to the next is always the same distance. But linear may not be always the best way to look at a scale, especially if you're wanting to measure price movement or the magnitude of price movement from one period to the next. Let me give you an example on that. I'm going to come over here and open up a new chart. I'm going to open up a new chart. I'm going to go here to a chart analysis. And I'm going to bring up $INDU. And I'm going to set it to the highest time frame we have, which is monthly. And on a monthly time frame, I know that I think it loads 50 years, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm going to go here to settings, 20 years. I'm going to say 100. So if we are in the year 2022 and I'm loading 100 years, I should have data from 1922. Let me scroll back. And my data starts, July 31st, 1922. So I have 100 years of Dow Jones data right here on my screen. In the year 1922, the Dow Jones was valued at 100 points. That's interesting, right? So yes, let's look at the data here and try to make some sense out of it. Okay, this is the whole historical expression of the Dow Jones, or the price fluctuations, since the year 1922. I want you guys to take a look at the scale here on the right-hand side, and it's a clear example of a linear scale where the space, or the space that you see between 5,000 and 10,000 is exactly the same as the space that you see between 30 and 35,000. So 5,000 points are represented with an equal amount of space or magnitude, right? However, we know that that's not precisely how the market moves, especially if you want to look at those price movements in a percentage basis. For example, when the Dow Jones was valued at 5,000 points and it went all the way up to 10,000, we know that that was a price or a value increase of 100%, because it doubled in value, 100% price increase. But if you look over here at the next one, from 10,000 to 15,000, that's not as a strong price movement, because all it took to move the Dow from 10,000 to 15,000 was a 50% move. Why? Because 50% of 10,000 is 5. If you add that, it takes you to 15,000. So as you go up in the scale, the magnitude of movement becomes less and less percentage-wise. Does that make sense? That's the reason why when you look at periods where the market has gone into a recession, for example, here's the 2008 recession, right? So you see the market, there's a big drop in price. We were about, the value of the Dow was about 13,000 and it dropped, well below the 8,000 mark. So we have about a 5,000 point drop right there on the scale. But I want you guys to look at that price drop of the 2008 and compare that to what's happened here in the 1930s, the Big Depression. The Big Depression, or the Great Depression, I'm sorry, that's the Great Depression of the 30s, of the 1929 and 30s, is almost insignificant compared to what happened in 2008. Of course, that is in a linear scale. If we talk about magnitude, we know that the Great Depression was a bigger market drop than what it was in the 2008 period. How do we make this a real comparison? Well, we have to turn it into a semi-log scale. Let me turn that over here. Let me double click on the candles, go to scaling, turn this into a semi-log, and then click OK. It shifts the chart. Look at the scale. Look at the space between 5,000 and 10,000 and the space between 10,000 and 15,000. You see how it's less, one is less than the other, because it's using the scale or turning the scale into a percentage scale. Now, if you compare what happened in the 2008 recession, you can compare that to what happened right here, back here in the 1929 and 1930s. Actually, that was 1931 and 32. That's odd. I see. Okay, so this is, 1929. Started in 1929, and it went through all the way until 1932. But you can see how one compares to the other. The market went from a high of 386, almost 400 points. It went all the way down to even 40 points. So we're talking about almost a 100% lost in value. And that's how you do a real comparison between one period and the other using a semi-log scale. And then that's the importance of understanding semi-log versus linear. And when you look at charts in a higher time frame, like on a weekly or a monthly, if you want to compare these magnitudes of price movement, then you have to use a semi-log. It gives you a better understanding of how the market moved. All right. That was a side note about semi-log. Let's go back in here. We talked about scaling for studies. Those can also be squeezed by clicking and dragging. Notice that it adjusts the scale. And if you click on the reset button here, it also resets the scaling of the studies. Because sometimes we want to be able to maybe draw some trend lines or draw some annotations on our drawing tools. And we can do that by squeezing the scale here on the right. Okay, remember that if you double click on any of the candles, you also have the ability to go into scaling and adjust the scaling a little bit so that you can, do whatever it is that you want to do, if it's drawing, if it's annotations, and give yourself a little bit more space around that study. So studies automatically choose the scale. When I put in this volume average, of course, it's going to automatically select its own subgraph. Now I can choose to put it right here on top of the candles if I want. You'll see something happening that you have to understand what that means. If I click on the volume and I try and I'm going to drag it over here to the top of the candles. And if I drop it here, it did that automatically. It didn't prompt me. I'm not sure if it didn't prompt me because I disabled that window. I probably did. Let me just do something. Let me do that one more time. Yeah, I probably just disabled that prompt. Let me go here into, I think it's a chart analysis preference. Let's go here to the general prompt for customization, display. Symbol, style, strategy, and data. So I'm not sure where that dialog remove. No. Oh, here we go. I have the one that says prompt for symbol axis scaling selection, and this one that says prompt for indicator axis scaling selection. I think it's turned on by default. You can double check that on your TradeStation, but I think it should be turned on, because what I was expecting is when I clicked on this volume indicator and I dropped it on the bars, I was expecting this exact, scaling dialog that you're going to get. If you try to shift things around instead of a chart, like moving an indicator, putting it up here, maybe you want to put two indicators in the same subgraph, whatever it is that you want to do, you're going to get this dialog that says, okay, you're trying to combine two scales. What is it that you want me to do? It's an important question, because the value here for volume average right now is about 749,000, and you have an average that's at 3.9 million. So you have bars that go all the way up to 18 million. That type of numbers are not the same for SPY. SPY is only $387. It doesn't even reach, close to 500 or 1,000. So if you put those two scales on the same, or the two items here on the same scale, you're going to see volume all the way up here in 18 million, and then spider all the way at the bottom squeezed or squashed as a flat line at the bottom, because it doesn't even reach 400 on the scale. So if you do the same axis as the underlying data, that's not the behavior you want. You can do it left axis, meaning that, okay, if you do left axis, means that leave the symbol here on the right, put the volume scale here on the left-hand side. I would probably choose that if I want to see both scales. Let's say I'm going to click OK here, and there we go. So now we have, I'm not using a separate subgraph for volume. Volume is right on top of the candles. I may want to play a little bit around with transparencies, because maybe I want to make the volume more like a shade behind the bars and give the candles a little bit more prominence, but that's something I can do later. And I think there's a class that I do on styling and color and things like that. But here, when it comes to scaling, you can see that on the right, I have the prices of spider, and here on the left, I have the values for my volume average study. Now I can reset this by clicking on the average volume and bringing it down. You can see that from a hand, you can see my cursor down here. From a hand, it turns into a little bubble with a plus, letting you know that it can be added here. And that's a way to separate them. Again, if I click and drag, you're going to see a hand until you see that little bubble with a plus, which is like adding to the subgraph. If you do no axis, that's another way to, ignore the scale for the volume. I can right click here on this left-hand side scale and uncheck it. So now I have a similar result, but I don't see the scale for volume. So volume is kind of detached from scale, and you can still see the spikes up and down if that is something that, it's okay with you. A lot of times we want to see that value reflected here on the right, that specific value. But sometimes, just looking at the indicator and how it's fluctuating, it's more than enough. So sometimes if you want to save space, combine studies on top of each other, this is one way to do it as well. So those are indicators that, have their own subgraph. Paint bars and show me's. Those are two types of analysis techniques. Let me go here to studies and add studies. So show me's and paint bars are two types of studies that go right on the candles. The show me, if you're familiar, it draws a dot and identifies a bar with specific conditions. And a paint bar, instead of putting a dot on the candle, it changes the color of the candle. So they're kind of similar, but they do the same. I mean, they're just conditional plotting. They plot only when the condition is true. Why would you have two separate ones? Show me, I would use for sporadic events, things that don't require a group of bars. For example, if you're looking for an inside bar, or if you're looking for a key reversal bar, those kind of sporadic events, you can mark them with a little dot. Now, a paint bar is more intended for a group of bars that meet certain criteria. For example, if you want to color the bars that are below an average, or color the bars that have increasing momentum, things like that, where you have the same color on different candles or groupings of candles, you can use a paint bar for that. Activity bar, we have a class on that. That's pretty much looking inside each one of the candles and drawing to the side. They draw right on top of the candles as well. And the probability map is also something that draws on the candle. So the only ones that draw on their own subgraph are indicators, and they usually draw at the bottom of the chart. Subgraph 1, this is a question from Prasad, is the main chart. Yes, that's correct. So when you have a chart, even though it's not split up into different subgraphs, yes, where the symbol is usually what's called subgraph 1. Let's go ahead and verify that, because I'm going to go here and add the study one more time. Let's go ahead and volume AVG, because there is a way for you to find out. So it goes right here. And if you go to studies and edit studies, and then click on customize on that volume average, the general tab, not the general, the style tab, no, the scaling tab. Sorry, the scaling tab says subgraph number 2. So it automatically assigns subgraph 1 to where the candles are, and then subgraph 2 is your study. And if you continue to add studies, let me add something else here. Studies, add studies. Let me add an RSI, for example. If I put on an RSI and I go to the scaling tab, you're going to see that the RSI is subgraph 3. You can change those here if you want to. So if you want the RSI to be above the average, you can say, I want that to be number 2, and then change the moving average and make that number 3. That's not the way I do it, though. The way I do it, if I want my RSI to be above my average, I use the click and drag. So I'm going to click my RSI. I'm going to drag it. I'm going to go here in between the candles and the volume average. So once you're in between there, release, and that's where the indicator goes. So that's going to take a little bit of practice, the clicking and dragging, but that's a very quick way for you to organize the studies within a chart. If I take the RSI and I put it on the candles, and I say I want that to be on the left axis, then you can see the RSI here. You can see the volume average at the bottom. To revert, double click on the RSI, drag it, and put it right here in between. Oh, it went right on top of the volumes. Of click and drag in between. Oh, now it's not working. So sometimes I say, let me disable the left axis. Let me put it below the volume average. There we go. Now we can put it right here in between. Let's see if that works. There we go. So as I said, sometimes it takes a few clicks here and there, but clicking and dragging, it's a very nice way for you to organize your studies within a chart. What else can I show you here on studies and scaling? Oh, subgraphs. How many subgraphs can you have in a chart analysis? The maximum is 16. So I can continue to add subgraphs and subgraph, and you can have up to 16. I still haven't met anyone, TradeStation clients, if I may say, that have split up their screen in so many subgraphs, unless you're using a vertical monitor. I know that some traders, they like to see things vertically. If that is the case, where the chart, instead of running horizontally, runs vertically on a monitor, maybe you can have as many subgraphs because you have the vertical space. But on a horizontal monitor, if you're adding things at the bottom, it starts, squeezing things and making them very narrow, so it's hard to see. But yeah, you can have up to 16 different subgraphs inside of a chart. Crazy, huh? What else can I show you? And just remember, each one of these studies, if you go into its settings, there's a scaling tab, and you can modify the scale of each one of those studies. Any other questions? I don't see any more questions here, and I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover today. How to do, linear scale versus a semi-log, how to adjust the scale here for pricing. If you wanted to add more detail, we talked about, adding subgraphs around the candles. We talked about, the scaling for different studies. So I think we have a very good handle on scaling on TradeStation. If you guys have any questions, we're going to do Ask the Experts on Tuesday at 11:30, so make sure you mark your calendars. But we do have a full schedule next week, which I'll be posting either this afternoon or Monday morning at the latest, where you can see what the topics are for the week. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. It is Friday, so I wish everyone a great weekend, and I'll see everyone on my next class. Okay, goodbye, everyone. Great having you.